Hey, hello there. Welcome to the next video on functions module. In this video, we are going to play with the functions. So the intention of taking this video is to gain more and more understanding about syntax of a function and to gain more and more confidence on the functions. All right. I'll try to think from your perspective about the functions, and then maybe I'll try to take few scenarios which you might be having as a doubt in your mind, and then we'll try to solve them, right? So let's quickly get started. Let's start with including header files. Okay, so now we have header files. Now, as we have discussed in the previous video, each and every function, or sorry, each and every C++ code needs to have main function. So that is something which you need to have, otherwise your program will not run, right? So let's start with main function. Now, the important thing about main function. The main function is entry point and it needs to be there in our code, right? Now, what is the return type of main function? The return type of the main function is int, right? Its return type is int. Now, in the previous video, I have told you that if the return type of function is, let's say, int, that means you need to return some integer value from it. If the return type of some function is float, that means you need to return float value from that function, right? In case of main function, its return type is int, then why we are not returning any value from the main function? This is first question. The second question is, who is actually calling this main function? And if we return any value from the main function, then who is going to cache that value and who is going to use that value? This is second question. So to begin with, I'm going to start with these two questions. So why we are not returning the value from the main function? And if we even return value, then what we should return, and if we return something, then who is going to use it, right? As the return type of the main function is int, that means if we want to return some value from the main, that should be some integer value, right? So maybe I can return something like this. Let's say I'm writing return 0, or maybe I'm writing return 1, or maybe I'm writing return 50. Okay, but what is significance if I say I'm writing return 0 from main function? What if I write return 1 from the main function? What is the significance? Okay, so let me first tell you who actually calls our main function. So whenever we execute our program, the operating system is responsible for calling our main function. Okay, now whatever explanation I'm giving to you right now, it's not 100% correct. As we will proceed ahead in this course, I'm going to cover all the things related to operating system and how exactly the code runs in our machine. But right now, just remember this thing: whenever you execute your code, the operating system is responsible for calling main function of your program. So who is going to trigger your code, or how the code will be triggered? By calling main function, the call will get triggered. So main function call will trigger main function, and the main function body will start getting executed, and the code will get over at the end of main function. So it gets start at the main function and it gets over at the main function. So who is responsible? Operating system is responsible. So if operating system is calling your main function, so whatever value you will be returning from the main function, who is going to cache that value? The operating system will obviously cache that value. Always remember, the function who calls the function will cache the value of, or will cache the return value. Okay, so the operating system will cache the return value of the main function. So what operating system says? Operating system says that if your program executes successfully without any error or without any interruption, then in that case you return me 0. So what operating system says? If your program is running very nicely without any issue, then return 0. If your program is getting failed or there are some exceptions or errors, we are going to learn about exceptions and errors in the further modules of C++. But right now just remember, if your program is getting failed due to some reason, so you might be using some programs like Google Chrome and some other program. You might see sometime while running Google Chrome, you might see that sometime we get an error, that is the Google Chrome is not responding, and then Google Chrome accidentally gets shut down, right? So such type of things are called as exceptions or errors. Okay, so if your program is getting some error, then in that case what operating system says, you should return me some error code which is a non-zero value. Now these error codes are defined by the operating system, and you can refer to your operating system manual and you can see the error code that you should follow in case of errors, right? So in case of error, you should return some non-zero value. So if you are returning 0, that means your program is getting executed successfully, and if you are returning non-zero value, that means your program is getting failed. All right, and this return 0 is not compulsory. If we don't write return 0 as a programmer, then compiler will by default return 0 from your main function. So whenever you don't return anything from main function, the compiler will implicitly add return 0 statement to your main function. Okay, and that's the reason in main function we don't need to write return statement, because compiler will do it for us. But not all compilers will do it for you, right? So some compilers, maybe some old compiler, might throw an error if you are not writing return 0 statement. So that's the reason, as a best practice, always remember from now on, the basic schema of C++ code is going to be this: hash include iString using namespace std, int main, return 0. Okay, so you should always return 0 from your main function until and unless your code has some or is facing some exceptions. Okay, so I hope you are very clear with this point now, that who calls main function? Operating system calls it. What should be the return value of main function? It should be 0 if there is no error. It should be non-zero positive value if there is some error. All right, cool. So let's move ahead and let's define few functions, or let's declare few functions. So let me declare a function which will give me square of any number that I will pass it as an input. So let me first declare it. So let's say I want to take square of some integer. So let me name that function as square, sqr. All right. Now this function will take one input, that is of type integer, and it will return a value of type integer. There is a probability that this can be a library function. That's the reason, let me change its name. Let me write its name as square. Okay, so this is the function that I am declaring. What is this? This is function declaration. We are just declaring a function, that we are just telling the compiler that we are going to have square function. It is going to take one input of type int and it is going to return value of type int. Okay, have we defined this function yet? We haven't defined it. That means this function don't have any body. This function doesn't have any body, right? If the function doesn't have any body, then will it be a good practice if we'll call it? So let's try. If the function don't have any body, that means we don't know that what the function is going to do, and we are calling that function, then it makes no sense, right? But still, let's see what will happen if we call a function without writing its definition. So let me call square function and let me pass 10 as the input. Now the square function, let's think in this way. The square function will return me the square of 10 or whatever input I am passing. So let me write it like this. Let me write cout 10 square is equal to square of 10 followed by Indian. You can see, surprisingly, the editor is not showing us any error. Editor is not saying that, oh, that function is not defined, you can't call them. So it's not showing any error. Let's see what will happen if we compile this code. So let me write clear and let's compile this code. So name of my file is 02 something something, playing with functions. The compiler is throwing an error. What compiler is saying? Compiler is saying that undefined reference to square. Now what this error means? The error means you are trying to call a function before it is defined. Okay, because the compiler, when it is trying to find the function body or function definition, it is not getting it, and that's why it is saying that undefined reference to square. Okay, so now what does that mean? It means that whenever you want to call any function, it needs to be defined. You have to compulsorily define it. Declaration is not enough. I am again saying declaration is just for the compiler. Declaration is just for telling the compiler that we are going to have this type of function. It is going to return value of this type and it is going to take input of these types. All right. But declaration is not enough if you want to really call that function or if you want to execute that function. So if you want to execute that function, then in that case you need to supply definition of the function, because in definition of the function you write function body, and that is compulsory if you want to execute that function. Okay, so let me just give you one simple example by which we will understand what is exactly difference between declaration and definition and why we need definition. Okay, so let's say you have an apartment and you are staying with your friend in your apartment, right? Now you need a maid. Let's say you need a maid, and then you went outside in market and you find one maid, and then you came back to your apartment and you told your friend that you have seen or you have got one maid for our apartment or for cleaning our apartment or for cooking in our apartment, right? So if you just tell your friend that you have found one maid for our apartment, then that's the declaration. You are just telling him that I have found one maid. She is like 30 years old. So that is just a declaration. You are just telling your friend that yeah, there is a maid and she is going to come to our home. That is just a declaration. But until and unless she physically comes to your apartment, that is an definition. Okay. So when she will actually come to your apartment, that is going to be the definition. So declaration is just telling something, or just for telling your friend that we have got a maid and she is going to look something like this and she is of this age. So if in case when the maid will actually come, and if in case at that time you are not in the apartment, your friend will understand that okay, this is the maid that my friend was talking about, because of the declaration that you gave to your friend. Okay, so that's why in case of compilers we give declaration, so that the compiler will understand, okay, cool, so this type of function is going to be, or this type of function is going to be defined in future. All right, and it's going to be of this type, but the definition is not yet there. So if you want to actually call that function, then it needs to be defined. If you want actually the maid to do some work, then the maid should actually come to your apartment, right? So similarly, let's quickly define the function. So let's write definition over here. So let me write int square. I hope you remember the syntax of defining a function. Int number, and then here let's write return number into number. So we are getting number as an input, and if we want to take square of it, then we will just multiply it by itself, right? So if we write number into number, then that will be a square of number, right? And then I'm just returning that square from the function. Cool. So now if I compile the code, you can see that the error has vanished. Okay, so compiler is now not giving any error. And now let's see, if we run this code, we are getting output as 10 square is equal to 100. Okay, let's quickly run the same function for some another input. So let me write 15 square is equal to square of 15. Okay, let's quickly see what we get as the output. So in this case, we are getting output as 10 square is equal to 100 and 15 square is equal to 225. Okay, let's again revisit the apartment example. Okay, now you went to the market, you find one maid, you directly bring her to your apartment. Okay, so in that case, do you really need declaration, or do you need to give description of the maid to your friend? No, because the maid is actually there in the apartment, right? So I am saying this because this declaration is not compulsory. Okay, if you are giving definition directly, then in that case the declaration is not mandatory, but there are few scenarios in which the declaration needs to be happen, right? So for example, you go to the market and you ask the maid to come to the apartment, but now she is saying that no, I will not come to apartment today, maybe I will come to apartment tomorrow. Okay, and maybe tomorrow you are not at the home. So in that case, what you need to do, you will need to tell your friend that, oh, tomorrow the maid is going to come and she looks something like this and her name is something like this, right? So in that case, you need to do declaration, because in that case the definition is not going to happen, right? Because she is going to come to your apartment tomorrow. Similarly, in case of functions as well, there are few scenarios where you need to declare the function and then the definition will come later. So this can happen, But if you are directly defining it before calling that function or before using that function, so here you can see that I am defining the function on line number 4 to 7, and I'm actually using that function or I'm calling that function on line number 11 and 12. So that means we are defining the function before the function call. So if you are doing something like this, you are defining a function before function call, in that case function definition is enough, function declaration is not needed. Okay, so let's quickly see. Let me clear the terminal and let's quickly compile the code. You can see that compiler is not giving any error, and if I run this code, you can see the code gets executed properly. We are not getting any error and we are also getting expected output. Okay, so what does that mean? This means that if you are calling, let's remember this thumb rule, if you are calling a function and if you already have its definition before its call, then in that case declaration is not mandatory. Okay, if you are already defining a function before calling it, then declaration is not mandatory. Now when declaration becomes mandatory? The declaration becomes mandatory if you are calling a function and the function definition is present after the function call. So let's say if I remove the function definition from here and if I write the function definition over here, okay, so it's not mandatory that the function definition should be always before the function call, or it's not mandatory that the function definition should be always above the main function. You can write anywhere in the code. Okay, you can write it before main function, you can write it after main function, anywhere it is fine. Okay, but in this case what is happening now, you are trying to call function on line number 8, you are trying to call it on line number 9, but in this case the definition doesn't exist before line number 8. Okay, so in this case what we need to do, you are trying to call the function on line number 8 but the definition doesn't exist. So in this case you need to give declaration. So you need to declare that, oh, this function is going to exist and its definition lies somewhere between our code, somewhere in the code itself. Okay, but it's not before this function call, that's why we are giving the declaration. So just remember this thumb rule, the declaration is mandatory if the function definition is coming in the code after the function call. So if you have a function call and the definition is written after the function call, in that case the declaration is mandatory. So let's see, if I execute this, compile and execute this code, this will successfully get executed. Okay, but if we skip the declaration, so if I comment out this declaration and let's see what will happen. So let me clear the terminal and let's quickly compile it. You can see that we are getting an error, that is square was not declared in this scope. Alright, so what we have learned so far, we have learned that if we are directly defining a function before the function call, then in that case declaration is not mandatory. But if you are defining a function after the function call, in that case declaration needs to be there. Okay, or this declaration is mandatory. So let me just comment it, let me remove its comment, and okay, cool. So declaration is mandatory. Now let's quickly see, can we write or can we define this function inside the main function? Okay, so we have seen that we can define a function before main function, we have seen that we can define a function after main function. Let's see, can we define a function in the main function? So let me just format it and let's me clear the terminal and let's quickly run this code. Yes, so you can see that it is giving an error and it is saying that a function definition is not allowed here. Okay, so that means you cannot define a function in C++ inside another function. This is a very important thing to note, right? In C++ you cannot define one function inside another function. It's not a good, or it's not allowed in C++ to define one function inside another, but this is allowed in many programming languages. You can define one function in another function in many programming languages like JavaScript. In JavaScript you can define one function inside another function, that's allowed. In Python also you can do that, but in C++ it is not allowed. Let's see, can we declare a function inside another function? Okay, so here what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to declare this square function inside main function. So let's see, is it allowed? So let's again compile the code. You can see the code is getting compiled, and if we can, or if we will run the code, you can see that we are getting an output. Okay, so what does that mean? You can declare a function inside another function, but you cannot define it in the another function. Okay, so I hope you will keep these rules in your mind. You can declare a function in another function, but you cannot define a function in another function in C++. Okay, it's not a generic rule for all the programming languages. It may vary as per the programming language. Okay, cool. So we have learned this new thing in this video, right? Now let's quickly define 2-3 more functions. So let me just define one function, that is int add2, which will add two numbers. So let me write int number 1 comma int number 2. We have already defined this function in the previous videos. So let me quickly write its code. So let me write return number 1 plus number 2. So this is my add to function. Similarly, let me write one more function, that is let's say add 4, and let me write int number 1 comma int number 2 comma int number 3 comma int number 4. Now this function will add 4 numbers. Here in this case I am not giving their declarations because I am directly defining them before the main function, and I am going to call them in the main function. So I am defining them before the call. That's why the declaration is not needed, right? Now here what I will do, I will just write return number 1 plus number 2 plus number 3 plus number 4. Okay, so if you want to add 4 numbers, then you are going to do something like this. You are going to call the add4 function. Add4 function is going to take 4 arguments. Now you are adding these 4 arguments and returning the addition, right? Now you can also do it little bit differently. Okay, now it makes no sense to do it in the way that I'm going to show you, but it is just for the syntactical understanding that you can do something like this as well. Okay, so instead of writing return number 1 plus number 2 plus number 3 plus number 4, you can also write something like this. You can also write return return add of 2, addition of 2 numbers, that is number 1 comma number 2. Okay, so this add 2 will return addition of number 1 and number 2 plus add 2 of number 3 and number 4. Okay, so here what we are doing, we have a function called as add2, which takes 2 input of integer type. So here for getting addition of 4 numbers, we are internally calling add2 function from add4 function, and this add2 function is giving us addition of the 2 numbers. So first, in the first call I am passing number 1 plus number 2, so this will give me addition of number 1 and number 2, plus we are doing then addition of number 3 and number 4, and then we are adding these 2 entities and then we are returning it, right? So this is valid, and I hope you have understood the flow, how this is going to happen, right? Similarly, you can also do something like this. You can also write return add2 of number 1 comma number 2. Now this add2 will give me the addition of number 1 and number 2, right? Now this addition, if I add in number 3, then I will get addition of number 1, number 2 and number 3. So for that I can also write something like this, add2 of add2 number 1 number 2 comma number 3. So in this case what is going to happen? Here we are calling add2, and the first parameter to the add2 is the return value of add2 function, where the inputs are number 1 and number 2. So in this case what is going to be the return value? It is going to be number 1 plus number 2. So here we are getting addition of number 1 and number 2. So let's say number 1 and number 2 are 10 and 20. So here we are going to get 30. Let's say number 3 is 30. So in that case here we are going to get 30. So what is going to happen in the next call? In the next call we are giving input as 30 comma 30. So 30 and 30 will get added and we'll get its answer as 60. And let's say we have the fourth number, that is number 4, as 40. So we need to add 40 to the 60, right? So for that I can again do something like this, add to So this is also a valid syntax. You can also do it like this. Okay. So the important thing about function is you just need to understand how the functions are getting called, how to call them, and then they are going to return us the value. And you can use that value and you can use that value in any expression, right? So in this case, we have used the return value of a function and we have passed that return value as an input to again the another function, right? Now let's quickly run this code and let's check if all things are working correctly as per our expectations or not. Okay, so let me just clear the terminal and let's quickly compile this code, and you can see that it is getting compiled. Now let's quickly run the code, and okay, we are getting output as 10 square 100 and 15 square 225. So actually we need to call this function. So let's quickly call this function. So let me write cout addition of 10 comma 20 comma 30 comma 40 is equal to add 4 10 comma 20 comma 30 comma 40 followed by endl. Okay, let's quickly run this. You can see that we are getting the answer as addition of 10 20 30 40 as 100, which is correct, right? So the code that we have written is working very fine. So you can either write something like this, or you can comment this, or you can write something like this. This is also valid syntax. So if we compile and run this, we will get the same output. All right. So I hope you have understood how these things are working, how we are calling a function. So it's not always necessary that you should call a function from main. You can call any function from any other function. So in this case, what we have done, we have called add4 function from the main function, and from this add4 function we are calling another function, that is add2 function. So it's not always compulsory that we should always call a function from main function. You can call a function from any other function. So in this case we are calling add2 from add4, and it is absolutely fine. Okay, now I have few more things to discuss with you. So let's quickly write declaration of this function, or let's quickly write declaration of this function. So let me write int add2 int comma int. Okay, and let me just remove these definitions from here and let's put them after the main function, which is absolutely fine. Okay, now in declaration we have seen that in declaration syntax we have to write return type, then name of the function, and then input type list. Okay, but in declaration you can also write input name list. It is also possible, it is also allowed. Okay, so in declaration you can also write something like this. This is nothing but input name list, and it is allowed in declaration. Now there is one more thing. You can also write declaration, or in declaration in input name list you can also give some different names. It's not necessary that you should give the same name over here which you are giving in the definition. It's not compulsory. You can give any name over here. Okay, because actually they are not needed. Compiler doesn't need them, but you can optionally give the names as well in the declaration. Okay, and you can also write something like this. You can give one name and you can skip one name. You can give second name and you can skip first name. Both things are fine. Okay, so in declaration you can optionally give names, and those names can be anything. Okay, it's not necessary that those names should be similar to the names that you are giving in the definition. It's not compulsory at all. All right, the another important thing, now let's forget about this declaration. Let me just remove this thing and let me take this thing back over here. Okay, and let me take this thing as well on the top. Okay, now you can see that we have two functions, add2 and add4. Now in this function, or in this case in the definition, I am writing return type of the function, that is int. What will happen if I remove this int? Will it be valid? Will it be a valid syntax? So yes, it will be a valid syntax. So in C++, you can skip return type of the function. You can optionally skip writing return type of the function, and if you skip writing return type of the function, the compiler will by default take return type as int. Okay, so as a programmer, if you forgot to write return type of the function, then compiler will by default implicitly take the return type as int. And you can see here I am compiling the code, I am executing it, and I am getting the correct output, right? So this is the another rule. In C++, if you keep writing return type of the function, then compiler will take it by default int return type. Okay, so I hope you are very clear with this idea. If you keep writing return type, then compiler will take it as int. But as a programmer, it's not a good practice. You should always give return type to the function. It's not a good practice to keep writing the return type, but it is just, I just wanted to tell you that it is valid in C++. So in MCQ, if you get something like this, or if you get functions something like this, then don't get confused, because if you don't write return type, then by default its return type is going to be int, right? So if I write a function that is add2 without a return type, and if I'm returning something like this 5.6, let's say I'm returning this hard-coded value that is 5.7, okay? So in this case, what will happen if we will execute add2 function, or what will be return value of add2 function? So it is going to be 5, because by default the compiler is going to consider return type as int. Here we are returning float value that is 5.7. Now this 5.7 will be converted to int and it will become 5. So its answer is going to be 5. Okay, so I hope you are very clear with this idea how it is going to execute. But I will recommend that please never keep writing the return type. It's good practice to write the return type even if the return type is int.